and we will make America great again. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, that begs the question, when was America great in the first place? Do you think that maybe it was great in the 1950s?
This is just the beginning. Wait till I get to Hollywood.
Bang, zoom!
You know, they say a woman's place is in the home,
And that was the sanitized version some white dudes were willing to put on primetime television. In real life. In real life. I feel like I'm living in a dystopian novel that was written in the 1950s and we lost. Let me get back to the regularly scheduled program and I'll show you what I'm talking about. We call it the Red Scare because we don't like to admit that it was actually just some white dudes scared of losing control.
With faith and devotion, I proudly accept your nomination for president. I had God on my side.
Those same white dudes thought it would be a good idea if women remained barefoot, pregnant, and invisible.
Opponent Donald Trump, who last night called Liz Cheney a radical war hawk and suggested that she be fired upon.
This must be disqualifying.
Oh yeah, those white dudes, they were straight, so being queer doesn't just make you a target, it makes you a traitor.
This week, a new executive order from President Trump taking aim at transgender military members.
Did you see what I did there? Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and keep doing that. Those white dudes also decided we needed fewer indigenous people and stopped recognizing 109 tribes of them in order to accomplish that.
Ending birthright citizenship, that was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country.
The tool they used? Cold War paranoia strapped to Russian A-bomb tests.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime.
Well, that tool and de facto and de jure racism. On August 28, 1955, 14-year-old Emmett Till was brutally lynched because a white woman lied.
Hate crime in America is at a 16-year high.
Those white dudes, they did make sure everyone was prospering, unless you were unfortunate enough to live in a rural area.
As a rare rift divides MAGA world over the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Then, Allen Ginsberg read Howl in San Francisco, thoroughly shocking the establishment and giving voice to what would become the beatnik movement.
What are you, some kind of dictator from the Middle East?
What the fuck is this, Trevor?
This is the painting you asked for, sir.
Where's my dick so small?
But that's the size it is in the photo.
That is the Too Long Did Not Watch version. If you want the full details, and a couple examples of that dystopian novel theory in each chapter, then sit back, relax, and get ready for one hell of a ride. Let's get this story started with McCarthyism after you click the thumbs up during the intro. At 8 p.m. in 1950 in the U.S., TVs were tuned to NBC and Uncle Milty and the Texaco Star Theater. Every Irene in the country hated Gordon Jenkins and the Weavers because Goodnight Irene was the #1 song. You probably caught Walt Disney's Cinderella at the drive-in or theater, and every young girl now dreamed of finding Prince Charming. Communist paranoia was running high, and U.S. citizens were on the precipice of giving up much civil liberty via Senator McCarthy and McCarthyism.
I think we've got a much more serious situation now in communist infiltration of the CIA.
Mr. Cone, what is the exact number of communists or subversives that are loose today in these defense plans?
I don't know.
February 9th, 1950, McCarthy said, "Today we are engaged in a final, all-out battle between communistic atheism and Christianity. The modern champions of communism have selected this as the time." In his speech to the Women's Republican Club of Wheeling, West Virginia on Lincoln's birthday. A scholar once said of McCarthy, "Once McCarthy got going, logic and decorum gave way to threats, personal attacks, and multiple distortions. It will roll over queer people too, but we'll save that for chapter 4.
Demagoguery, which would be the practices of the demagogue. By weaponized communication, I mean the strategic use of communication as an instrumental tool and as an aggressive means to gain compliance and avoid accountability.
McCarthy refused to follow established rules, customs, and procedures. If he were around today, he'd probably be sending out mean tweets all the time, or whatever the fuck they are called on Lies Social. President Truman previously formed the Federal Employee Loyalty Program, which spent a couple $1 million to root out 500 or 600 people from the pool of about 1,000 times that.
This is an order creating and implementing the Department of Governmental Efficiency, known as DOGE.
Also, the House Committee on Un-American Activities investigated the Hollywood 10 who refused to answer questions and were jailed and blacklisted. Press releases mentioned the jail terms, but not the contempt that they were actually charged with for refusing to answer questions. This was a direct attack on due process designed to make them suffer professional losses. By 1950, the Red Scare was winding down until McCarthy gave that speech I mentioned earlier and heated it back up. The speech also included, "While I cannot take the time to name the men in the State Department named as members of the Communist Party and spy ring, I have a list of 205. This list was never produced because I doubt that even McCarthy knew who was on it.
They rigged the election and I became president, so that was a good thing.
The speech is responsible for the term McCarthyism via a political cartoon by Herbert Bloch, or Herblock, on March 29, 1950. I was unable to verify the actual cartoon, so if I put the wrong one on the screen, can you let me know that and show me the right one in a comment, please? However, simply making this claim made McCarthy a very well-known senator, one might even say famous. With fame comes power. I will mention this dude again, so keep him in mind. So far, the only thing great about the 1950s is how quickly Americans were willing to give up their civil liberties, and that's more amazing than great. Maybe women fared better in that decade.
Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scout.
Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts captivated Americans at 9 o'clock Monday nights in 1951.
They try.
You also probably heard Nat King Cole's Too Young at some point that day. I'm sorry for that. You probably marveled at love conquering all and converting Roman soldiers to Christianity during Nero's reign in one of that year's top films, Quo Vadis. During World War II, women took jobs that servicemen left behind. In the 1950s, men returned and expected women would return to domesticity.
Let's start all over again. Oh, brother. Oh, brother is right. Look at that hair, that skin, that mouth.
A 22-year-old person in 1951 was born in 1929. Their early memories were of the Great Depression, their teen years overshadowed by World War II. In their early 20s, the constant threat of nuclear annihilation loomed. We'll explain that last one in 3 more chapters. Well over half of the country's elementary students learned to read from Dick and Jane readers. These books focused on a family with mom, dad, 3 kids, and a dog. They also reinforced strict gender roles.
I recently wrote a book for kids, and it's called As You Grow, and it teaches kids biblical wisdom through the seasons of their life. I was denied by over 50 woke libraries who have hosted drag queen story hours.
The archetypal American family was heterosexual, white, and suburban, with a working father, a stay-at-home mother. They definitely were not indigenous peoples, who we'll talk about in Chapter 5.
Thanks for telling me.
Women were also systemically oppressed, otherwise it would have been Lucy D. Studios. Most banks did not allow women to open accounts without a male relative's signature, and many employers forced women to leave when they married. Women who were in the workforce had no legal protection from sexual harassment.
So we play this game here. It's called Fave 5. I'll ask the question. Ivanka, you answer first, and then Dad, you answer also. Okay, Ivanka, what's the favorite thing you have in common with your father?
Either real estate or golf.
Donald, with your daughter?
Well, I was going to say sex, but
Being a wife wasn't much better. Most states gave men legal rights over their wives' earnings, property, and decisions. Domestic and child abuse were a private family matter with limited court intervention, and reproductive rights simply did not exist. Marital rape was generally not recognized as a crime, and women were legally expected to obey their husbands. At this time, psychiatric and religious communities were in lockstep when it came to women who wanted to stray from these strict gender roles, and not in a good way. Simply watching television offered gender role indoctrination with shows like Father Knows Best, I Love Lucy, Leave It to Beaver, and The Donna Reed Show.
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
The male-dominated political arena showed little, if any, desire to correct these issues. Women could find work as service personnel, manufacturing workers, particularly in clothing, teachers, and nurses. The first two were typically low-paying and physically demanding. The last two required specialized training. And the men's attitudes? I think it's better I show you.
Bearings Inspector. She's a good one, too. Just look at that record. Okay, now, Walt, you've had your little joke. Give her to somebody else. I ask for a man. What's wrong with her? She's a woman, isn't she? Not so long ago, you sent me a girl by the name of Myrtle Malloy. Well, in a matter of days, that bench looked more like her dressing table.
Imagine having this dude for a boss without any sexual harassment laws in place. So far, politics was oppressive and women were repressed. Nothing great to see here. Maybe the LGBTQIA+ community fared better. On Monday at 9 p.m. in 1952, people were watching I Love Lucy. The melody of Blue Tango by Leroy Anderson was slowly driving people mad by getting stuck in their heads. Everyone marveled as the big top came to the big screen with Charlton Heston in The Greatest Show on Earth. You'd have heard several stories throughout the year of State Department employees being dismissed due to their sexuality.
Breaking news from Washington right now. The president just tweeted that transgender people will not be allowed to serve in the U.S. military in any capacity.
Homosexuality was illegal in every state, forcing the homosexual community underground. Cities boomed after World War II, and homosexual communities flourished within them. Because outlawing homosexuality doesn't make people straight any more than outlawing black would make them white. Homosexuals and communists became linked in American minds. Conspiracy theories about communists enticing people into perverse sexual activities helped. People assuming communists and homosexuals shared characteristics like moral weakness, psychological dysfunction, godlessness, undermining traditional families, and recruiting were also prevalent. Does any of that sound familiar to anyone 73 years later?
We have your friend in the next room. She's already told us that you're gay. You give us the names of others and we'll go easier on you.
This culminated in the Lavender Scare, or mass firings of State Department employees for their sexuality, because communists could exploit their secret. I guess making homosexuality socially acceptable so they didn't have a secret just wasn't an option. Thus, the LGBTQIA+ community became a victim of the Cold War, especially after McCarthy directly linked the two. Psychology was backing all this nonsense up. Psychologists were arguing about the cause of homosexuality, sexual immaturity from poor parenting, an aversion to the opposite sex, or one of several other theories. The 1952 DSM-1 included homosexuality as a sociopathic personality disturbance. In this environment, Christine Jorgensen proved that she had more balls than all the men supporting this stuff.
It's like the radical transgender movement is per capita the most violent, domestic terror threat. If this was any other group, you see it.
On December 1st, 1952, the New York Daily News ran Jorgensen's story on the front page above the fold. I talk about Christine Jorgensen pre-transition the same way she spoke about herself pre-transition. I think that's the fairest path to take in honoring her memory. Her autobiography is linked in the description. Bronx, New York, May 30th, 1926. The Jorgensens have a son who they named George William Jorgensen Jr. Jorgensen's effeminate demeanor led to childhood bullying. They preferred dolls to sports and playing house to roughhousing. Even Jorgensen's sister joined in the bullying. Jorgensen once asked their mother, "Mom, why didn't God make us the same?" Through their teen years, Jorgensen became sexually attracted to male classmates and friends. They never felt like a homosexual. Jorgensen felt like a woman trapped in a man's body. After Pearl Harbor, Jorgensen attempted to enlist, but was rejected due to their slight stature and feminine demeanor. Then Jorgensen got drafted, and all of a sudden they were man enough to serve. Beginning their service after the war ended, Jorgensen fulfilled a clerical role processing men being discharged. Once the discharges were processed, Jorgensen was given an honorable discharge of their own.
Breaking news from Washington right now. The president just tweeted that transgender people will not be allowed to serve in the U.S. military in any capacity.
During the war, Jorgensen learned about transgender people in Europe, and they began investigating that route for themselves. A lack of psychiatrists and doctors performing gender reassignment surgery in the U.S. led Jorgensen to investigate European doctors. Jorgensen started taking estrogen. In 1950, they traveled to Denmark to meet with Dr. Christian Hamburger, the first doctor to diagnose them as transgender. 2 years of therapy and planning culminated in Hamburger removing their male genitalia. She legally changed her name to Christine, got her gender changed on her passport, and began using female pronouns. Years later, Christine obtained a surgically constructed vagina. Christine returned home in 1952. The U.S. was fascinated by headlines like, "Bronx boy is now a girl," and "Dear Mom and Dad," son wrote, "have now become your daughter." A supportive family helped Christine stay in the public eye, talking and writing about her struggles honestly. The press learned Jorgensen did not have a vagina, and the press started referring to her as an altered male and a morbid transvestite. She persisted in talking about her plight.
I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America, please?
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Sir. You will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way.
This hearing is adjourned.
She became an entertainer and speaker, performing in nightclubs, plays, and college lecture halls. She was engaged twice. The male gender on her birth certificate prevented marriage. One fiancé lost his job because of the engagement.
Hey, it's Mama's boy! Merry Christmas, Georgia! My name is George Jorgensen Jr.
In 1967, Jorgensen published Christine Jorgensen, a personal autobiography, and in the early 70s, Hollywood turned it into a highly exploitive movie. The work Christine Jorgensen did to further LGBTQIA+ rights cannot be overstated or forgotten.
I understand. In death, a member of Project Mayhem has a name. His name.
Say her name. Her name was Christine Jorgensen. Her name was Christine Jorgensen. Her name was Christine Jorgensen. Christine died in the late 1980s when she lost her battle with cancer. So far on the list of not great things in the 1950s, we have politics, the repression of women and queer people. Even relations with indigenous peoples were great. Monday nights at 9 o'clock in 1953, America was still watching I Love Lucy. Except now they had Percy Faith and his orchestra's song from Moulin Rouge, Where Is Your Heart?, driving them slowly insane. The world met Never Never Land, Captain Hook, and Peter Pan for the first time, and they fell in love with the top movie of 1953. While that was happening, the House was passing the House Concurrent Resolution number 108. This resolution states, at the earliest possible time, all of the Indian tribes and the individual members thereof located within the states of California, Florida, New York, and Texas should be freed from federal supervision and control, and all disabilities and limitations specifically applicable to Indians. This means that thousands of people were disenfranchised, kind of like everyone with brown skin in 2025.
Take a look at this post from the Associated Press coming down just moments ago as a federal judge has blocked the Trump administration from ending birthright citizenship.
All in all, 109 tribes were ordered to distribute their lands to the private holdings of their members and dissolve their governments, effectively ending self-government by thousands of indigenous peoples.
If a communist gets elected to run New York, it can never be the same, but we have tremendous power at the White House to run places when we have to.
Lands in California set up during the Depression for homeless indigenous peoples were also dissolved. This type of disenfranchisement didn't stop with the natives, but we'll talk about that in Chapter 7. Later in the year, Public Law 208 gave state governments the right to enact law enforcement on indigenous lands in 5 states and Alaska, which was still a territory at this time. In 1955, 9 cities were designated as relocation sites for indigenous peoples, and thousands were forced to relocate from tribal lands to these cities. Many of these cities would later become sanctuary cities. To any indigenous peoples watching this video, I'm sorry that your chapter is so short. The problem is I am having an extreme amount of trouble finding reliable sources of information about this. So if you have any, leave them in a link in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to make an addendum. Additionally, you will be showing up in the next episode in this series, which is about the 1960s, and probably the one after that about the 1970s. Okay, politics was oppressive, women were second-class citizens, queer people were victims of the Cold War, and indigenous people simply stopped being recognized. Halfway through the video and still nothing great about this decade. Maybe there was something great about stopping the spread of communism. In 1954, I Love Lucy ruled the airwaves for the 3rd consecutive year. I had to have a little fun with the video overlay. Kitty Callan's Little Things Matter a Lot was tearing up the charts. The Christmas blockbuster was born with Bing Crosby in White Christmas. On August 20th, 1953, the Soviets tested a 400-kiloton nuclear bomb and announced that they now had the same nuclear power as the U.S. The U.S. responded with Operation Alert, civil air defense drills, which brings us to Duck and Cover with Bert the Turtle, the video I used as a backdrop for the opening. The film opens with Bert the Turtle enjoying his day and smelling the flowers, while a happy sing-along style children's song introduces him to the audience. 17 seconds in, a Capuchin monkey tries to blow him up with dynamite. A dog whistle to racists. We'll talk more about racists in the next chapter. The song continues and tells everyone that we have to learn to duck and cover like Bert.
That's why these children are practicing to duck.
Then it fades to an elementary classroom. The voiceover tells us these kids are learning to duck and cover, which will somehow protect them from a nuclear bomb. That's right, the same government that Disenfranchised natives and oppressed women also told kids that cardboard blocks gamma rays.
First, you'll have to know what happens.
The film then moves through a montage of other dangers in the modern world. 2 minutes in, we see an animated nuclear explosion. The propaganda supposedly teaching about nuclear attacks and how they work continues for another 8 minutes. This is how U.S. children were taught about communism, and the USSR in particular. This fear of them, hatred of the other, helped hide the economic disparity between urban and rural peoples, which is explained in Chapter 8.
Therefore, propaganda is vastly more important in democratic societies.
In recognizing a communist,
Adults had films like How to Spot a Communist, teaching that reading communist papers, affiliating with communist organizations, and defending communist countries are communists. But never fear, the good and noble U.S. government taught us how to spot this propaganda.
Peace is a word that sends cold shivers down the spines of American capitalists. But on Wall Street, it is a word that spells ruin.
Seriously, the dude is speaking English and peace is written on the wall in English over the Russian flag. This is U.S. propaganda about Russian propaganda? Okay, so how do we recognize propaganda?
It's a strange, shadowy world of the doctored photograph, the misquotation, the insinuation, and the lie. Now, some of this material to us is comical. Some of it is tragic. Some of it's weird. Some of it's dumb. But all of it.
After that, he moves through explaining how Soviet propaganda depicts U.S. troops around the world. He sums it up like this.
And in some places around the still free world, some people believe them. Like to know what they're saying about you and all American soldiers? Well,
the film explains for 14 minutes Soviets are a captive audience to their government. The government says that things are great somewhere else in the USSR to everyone. That's when they say this.
The communists are good at making propaganda in a big, noisy way.
Your name has not appeared in the Epstein files.
Those files were run by the worst scum on earth. They were run by Comey. They were run by Garland. They were run by Biden.
And in a quiet, insidious way, too.
President Donald Trump did amplify on his platform Truth Social an outlandish and baseless claim that the former president Joe Biden was executed in 2020 and replaced by a robotic clone.
That aired on television in 1954. The United States intentionally made people paranoid about communist incursion through propaganda aimed at children in school and adults in the media. McCarthy accused the U.S. Army of being communists and was censured as a result. He lost much of his power in 1954. To recap, the 1950s had an oppressive government, women were second-class citizens, queer people were Cold War victims, indigenous people stopped being recognized, and the oppressive government scared the populace with propaganda. That sounds much more awful than it does great. Maybe there was something great happening with civil rights?
The greatest name in cosmetics.
Tuesday, 10 p.m., 1955. The $64,000 question had more viewers than I Love Lucy on Monday nights. The melody from Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White by Perez Prado and his orchestra would not go away because they kept playing it on the radio.
Now, tell me, what do you play?
The 1950s really were Disney's decades. In 1955, Lady and the Tramp took the top honors at the box office. More forceful Jim Crow law enforcement started after the Brown v. Board ruling of 1954. This is the ruling that eventually, and for legal purposes only, desegregated schools. I talk about it extensively in How Did We Get Here, the inaugural episode of this series. I'll link it on the end screen, and you can throw it in your watch later list. Jim Crow laws segregated public facilities in the southern U.S. until 1964 and provided a means for white officials to rescind black people's voting rights. Many southern municipalities forbade black people from testifying against white people.
A group of white supremacists has founded a 160-acre settlement in the Ozark Hills for white people only, and it's called Return to the Land.
When black people did testify, the judge and the jury were exclusively white. Do I have to detail what this allowed to happen to black people at the hands of white people? In the first episode of this series, I talked about the massive resistance campaign started by the governor of Virginia. Part of that campaign was increased violence against black people. On May 5, 1955, in Belzoni, Mississippi, Reverend George W. Lee, a black minister who registered about 100 black voters, was shot and killed.
A Bay Area man is facing hate crime charges. Pinellas County deputies say 28-year-old Jordan Patrick Leahy intentionally sideswiped a car with a black driver, gave a Nazi salute, and pretended to shoot the driver. Deputies say Leahy then punched the man in the face while screaming a racial slur. He later told police he wanted to shoot 60 to 70 people.
At the same time, 14-year-old Emmett Till was begging his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, to visit Mississippi for the summer. Emmett wanted to stay with his great-uncle, Moses Wright. Till Mobley struggled because she knew how dangerous rural Mississippi was for a young black man. She reluctantly allowed the visit.
So we have a lot of work to do. Just getting rid of these statutes is not ending the problem of racism and classism.
All right, all in favor? That carries 5-0. Congratulations.
Thank you all.
Imagine the sheer terror Till Mobley felt on August 13th after hearing that Lamar Smith was shot and killed in broad daylight on the courthouse steps of Lincoln County Courthouse in Brookhaven, Mississippi, by 3 white men. One of those men simply walked past the sheriff while still covered in blood. Smith was a 61-year-old World War I veteran who was helping black men fill out voter registration forms.
10 o'clock Friday night, hundreds of white nationalists storming the University of Virginia, protesting plans to remove a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
On August 24th, Emmett met Carolyn Bryant, a white woman working alone at a store. The beatnik movement would have a strong equality of people ethos fighting against the type of racism we're about to see, but that's Chapter 9. Carolyn accused Emmett of flirting with, attempting to touch, and wolf howling at her. Late on August 27th, Roy Bryan, Carolyn's husband, and J.W. Millam, Carolyn's brother, kidnapped Emmett. They fastened a cotton gin fan to Emmett's neck using barbed wire and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. After shooting him in the face. Before that, they brutally beat and tortured him for hours.
You can see the silver 2010 Dodge Challenger barreling down the hill toward a sea of targets with little time to react, slamming to a stop only after it hit a van and another car. Locked in, that car shifting in reverse, screeching back down the street to get away. One person, a 32-year-old woman, left dead.
Emmett had to be identified by the ring he wore because his body was completely unrecognizable. Till Mobley brought Emmett's body back to Chicago for an open casket funeral. Over 10,000 people viewed Emmett's mutilated body. Look magazine published explicit photos of Emmett's viewing, which were printed worldwide. After Roy and J.W. were acquitted, despite ridiculous amounts of evidence against them, Look magazine paid them $4,000, or $44K in 2025 money, to tell the world about killing Emmett. Thank you, Double Jeopardy.
The white supremacist neo-Nazi thug that used his vehicle as a weapon of death and terror, killing Heather Heyer and injuring dozens of others back on August 12th of 2017, after attending an alt-right rally, was sentenced to life in prison today.
The men were unapologetic and provided extremely graphic details about Emmett's torture. The civil rights movement was smoldering for some time, but this napalmed that bitch. If you don't know what napalm is, subscribe, ring the bell, and YouTube will tell you when I put out the next video in this series, which is all about the 1960s. By the way, Carolyn Bryant later stated that she lied, and nothing Emmett did could ever justify what happened to him. The book, The Blood of Emmett Till, is linked in the description. While napalming the civil rights movement did allow a lot of good to come from this incident eventually, I still wouldn't call it great. But everybody had money in the 50s, right? Working fathers, stay-at-home mothers, a car, and a picket fence. Everybody had that, right?
Leave it to Beaver.
Just kidding, I Love Lucy was the top TV show of 1956.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the end of Lonely street at Heartbreak Hotel.
Rock and roll finally began to dominate the radio with Elvis's Heartbreak Hotel. His Ed Sullivan appearance was also the most watched moment in TV this year.
Yours was the face I saw above my cradle.
1956 saw Charlton Heston cement his place in cinema history by playing Moses in The Ten Commandments. In March, the U.S. Census Bureau stated the median U.S. family income increased by 6% to $4,400, or about $50K in 2025 money. This fostered the modern lie known as the American Dream. Come to America, where the streets are paved with gold, and anyone can be rich and prosperous if they only work hard enough.
This time I'm doing what I want to do with respect to the tariffs. I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass.
However, the gains were not evenly distributed. In non-agricultural fields, income rose by about 7%, while agricultural workers' income rose by 0%. Significantly widening the income gap between rural and urban populations.
Since taking office, my administration has launched the most sweeping border and immigration crackdown in American history.
I've been involved in dairy farming my entire life. We have about a dozen full-time and part-time employees, and the vast majority of them are of Mexican descent. For 30 years, I've been hiring foreign-born people because there's not enough domestic people that want to come and work.
If hard work equaled prosperity, then teachers would lead the pack, with farmers running right against their heels. That dream is a lie. The exodus from the country to the city started at the beginning of the 20th century. The allure and excitement of city life to young people and the promise of prosperous work fueled the exodus.
Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country.
Ridicule pouring in on social media, with memes going viral.
1956 saw a mass exodus from farms to cities, totaling 10% of the rural population. Technological advancements industrialized farming in a way never before possible, contributing to the exodus as well. Mechanization allowed people to continue farming later in life by making it a lot less backbreaking. Parents held on to the family farm past the time their kids needed to earn their own incomes, greatly assisting the exodus.
Well, you probably saw I got myself into a little trouble because I said, I don't want to take people away from the farmers, and we're going to do something that we're going to sort of put the farmers in charge.
What took 14 to 16 people in 1950 had decreased to only 1 or 2 people by 1956, exacerbating unemployment rates. The federal government, led by Eisenhower and the Social Security Administration, stepped in to help. For the third time since farmers were first added to the Social Security rolls in 1951. New SSA guidelines were projected to assist 600,000 agricultural workers. They actually helped 900,000, helping explain why so many rural families moved to cities in 1956. So far, we've learned that politicians were oppressive, women were second-class citizens, queer people were Cold War victims, indigenous people were disenfranchised, minorities were murdered publicly, and large numbers of poor people were overlooked. Let's give the 1950s one last chance to be great. Maybe it was the youth that were great. In 1957, Westerns took over the small screen, with Gunsmoke being the most popular show of the year. Rock and roll continued to dominate the radio waves with Elvis's All Shook Up. Moviegoers were treated to the World War II epic Bridge Over the River Kwai, which was the top critical and commercial movie of the year. In the 1960s, the youth rebelled against society with the hippie movement, but those hippies had older siblings, and the hippies have their roots in the beatnik movement of the late 1950s. On October 7, 1955, Allen Ginsberg took to the stage at Sixth Gallery in San Francisco and began to read.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix.
The epic poem heavily utilizes profanity and graphically depicts sex acts and drug use. The audience, drunk on free wine, were rowdy and ready to hear Ginsburg challenge almost every political norm live on stage. Free wine, radical poetry, and pissed off youth. Nope, no cultural revolution about to happen here. Nothing to see. Move on.
This is just not about one man. It's about the detainment of journalists and what press freedom means here in America.
In 1956, Lawrence Ferlinghetti published Howl and Other Poems, which is linked in the description. The federal government seized the London printed book in port. Ferlinghetti and a guy whose first name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but whose last name is Moreo, the manager of Ferlinghetti's City Lights books, were both arrested.
Well, we're going to turn now to the topic of book banning in the United States, with the news earlier this week that a children's picture story by the actress Julianne Moore is on a list of library books suspended for a compliance review after that executive order by President Trump.
However, they seized the second printing of the book while the first printing was already making its rounds among the youth. The seizure created a Streisand effect for both the book and Ginsburg. The obscenity trial that followed cemented Ginsburg as a counterculture icon. The government was unaware that Ferlinghetti had shown the manuscript to the American Civil Liberties Union and secured their defense if necessary.
When immigrants' lives are threatened, we show up.
Ultimately, Ferlinghetti won the court battle and overturned obscenity laws nationwide. This paved the way for future beat writings as well as the hippie writers that will follow in the 60s. And that concludes our investigation into the greatness of the 1950s, unsuccessfully. Let's wrap this video up now, shall we? All in all, I do not see anything great about the 1950s. There were authoritarian forces controlling the U.S. government and persecuting people on both religious and political grounds. In 2025, instead of being a relic, those authoritarian forces are sitting in the Oval Office. Women were expected and to a large degree forced to fulfill a role of domesticity, caring for the house, raising the children, and obeying their husbands or fathers. In 2025, the president thinks he has the right to protect women whether they want it or not, because that's not a consent issue in any way at all. The LGBTQIA+ community was victimized and in many cases outlawed during this decade. Even psychology was oppressing them and labeling them as mentally ill. In 2025, psychology is no longer homophobic, but the military has rebanned them and is refusing to admit that transgender people even exist. While progressive forces were making headway against segregation and racism, all in all during this decade, it only had the effect of increasing hatred of and violence towards black people. Here in 2025, we're doing so much better with this that people are actually making whites-only towns for f***'s sake. America is the land of milk and honey where everyone was prosperous, completely ignored the plight of agricultural workers and rural populations in general, creating a hidden epidemic of poverty in the rural U.S., which included people of every race. In 2025, Trump is just using tariffs to hurt everyone who buys things in the United States, including himself, for crying out loud. When the youth finally allowed their disenfranchisement to be published and recognized, they were arrested for it. In 2025, those people are simply disappeared by ICE. All in all, I'd say this decade was pretty horrible, and 2025 is f***ing worse. But what do you think about Trump's administration being a dystopian novel from the 1950s? Let me know in a comment. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, and I'll see you the next time there's an impossible map on time. Hey, those white dudes, they did make sure everybody was prospering, unless you were unfortunate enough. By 1951, nope, I already read that. And yes, making homosexuality sex. In 1955, 9 cities were designated as relocation sites for the indigenous peoples, and Jim Crow laws segregated public Now, SSA guidelines were protected to in 1956, Lawrence